All right, and I'll just do a quick introduction. So thank you everyone for joining here today. Today's presentation titled Learner Experience Design, Marrying Think-aloud Methods with Heuristic Evaluations to Improve Course Design is brought to you by Aldemir and Andrea Gregg. And today's presentation is being brought to you by the Information Experience Lab at the University of Missouri, and of course, the AECT's Design and Development Division. And we are very appreciative of you two for putting this presentation together. So I'll pass the mic to you all now.
Okay, great. Thanks, Noah, for inviting us and introducing us. Very happy to be here. We'll just do some quick introductions. I'm Andrea Gregg. I am currently in a role within Penn State's Department of Mechanical Engineering as a director of online pedagogy. Most of my background prior to this position was at Penn State World Campus, which is our online campus. So that's been my research focus and sort of my career trajectory, starting as an instructional designer, and then I was a manager, and now I'm in this role. But the project that we'll talk about today stemmed from my previous position, but from a research perspective has continued into my current position. So I will let Tuche introduce herself.
Thanks so much, Andrea. Hi, everybody. My name is Aldemir, and I'm a postdoctoral research assistant postdoctoral associate. I totally mix different titles, I suppose. Anyway, in graduate school of education at the University of Pennsylvania. How I met with Andrea and got involved in this project, I used to be a research assistant in World Campus when I was doing my PhD with Andrea and another Dr. Rick Scherer as well. And that's how I get involved with this project. And yeah.
Okay, great. So I wanted to start just laying a little groundwork of a area of study that is still kind of being settled. So often when people explain learner experience design, they sort of parallel with user experience design. And this is a desire map or image. And this is a pretty common way to illustrate from what user experience design is all about. And it's, you have sort of the designer intention on the left, the plan, and then you have what users actually do, which is the path that they create, because it's more convenient or easier or any number of reasons. So user experience design is largely about learning from the users and minimizing that difference between designer intent and what users actually do and want to do. So one of the useful sort of, I would say, bucket definitions of learner experience design comes from Schmidt and Huang. It's a human-centric, theoretically grounded, and socioculturally sensitive approach to learning design intended to propel learners towards identified learning goals and informed by UXD methods. That said, I would offer these caveats that it's still an emergent area within our field. And even though I just gave a definition, I would say that there is not yet a singular definition. And one example of that is there's sort of a continuum of the way that people talk about LXD, from basically it's replacing user with learner, and it's pretty much the same as user experience design, to the other side of the continuum, which is it's very much about each individual learner and their own goals and designing experiences, co-designing experiences with learners. So there's a broad spectrum. What we're talking today is definitely more on the user experience design side of things, but learner experience design, like I said, is still kind of emerging. Definitely adopts and adapts methods. So what we're going to talk about are Think-alouds, and that is definitely adapted from user experience research and adapted to the learning context. And there are some examples of that you'll see. And I would say definitely UX is understudied in online learning context. So for the most part, instructional designers, especially with a master's degree, don't get training or even talk about how the interface, the design of learning management system, how you label things, and how the learner actually navigates, how all that comes together and actually impacts learning. So that was some of the motivation. And this is just a way to think about it. This is incomplete. It's just sort of a way that we put together as we were working through this. So if user experience design is about customers / users and their needs, learner experience design about learners and their needs. The goals of UXD: design a seamless customer experience, seamless user experience. Often it's discussed how to get them to the shopping cart, how to get them to check out in the most seamless way of like an e-commerce site. Increase customer loyalty, identify misalignments between what the designer intends and actual user experience. And the risks are frustrated customers, losing customers. On the learner side, there's some fundamental differences. So designed to maximize learning experience. As anyone knows who's been a learner, as we all have, it's not always seamless. You hit bumps along the way. You experience things that are frustrating, challenging. So there are some key differences there. But another goal is to increase learner efficacy. So one of the ways that, especially in the project we're going to talk about, that we've talked is don't add extra roadblocks that make things hard that shouldn't be hard. Like, don't make the learner have to figure out where to submit their homework in the learning management system. And this is similar: identify misalignments. And then some of the risks of not doing it: frustrated learners, less effective pedagogy, and learner disengagement. So the journey to today, and we're going to kind of narrow in, I'm going to give sort of a broad picture, and then Tuche is going to really narrow in on one kind of slice of this ongoing project. So this came about, it's a large team effort, came about because of a major LMS switch at our university from Angel to Canvas. And what was taking place, we're within Penn State, we're fortunate to have a high number of instructional designers. Often each college has an instructional design unit. Some departments even have their own instructional design units. And what was happening when this transition was happening was that designers were getting together and saying, okay, well, we should, instead of where we do this, how we do this in Angel, we should do it this way. And that's going to be better for the learner. And sort of Rhonda Reed, who was kind of the instigator of this whole thing, said, well, shouldn't we be like asking the learners and watching how they're actually using our designs instead of making all these assumptions? And that sort of spread throughout some different design units. And then 3 others said, hey, we want to do this as well. And there was a shared interest kind of in validating design decisions. And at the university level, while nothing's going to be dictated and people aren't going to be able to be told, you should always put your syllabus here in Canvas, there was interest in having some research-backed best practices suggestions, which led to kind of this focus of how are students experiencing the UX of the online course designs, and what design principles and learning design best practices do these experiences suggest? So the methods were Think-aloud, which is where we asked learners to perform tasks, specific tasks related to learning, submit an assignment, find your teammates, email your professor, post to a discussion, very common tasks. And then they're verbalizing as they're doing it. And the facilitator is identifying where they're hitting problems and also kind of how they tend to do things. We also had retrospective verbal probing and difficulty ranking. So we had 4 design units involved. Each design unit created their own list of tasks. So we have this kind of tension between each unit and each group kind of wanting to do their own thing, but also using this larger set of methods, use their own course designs, recruited their own participants. And we had a total of 19 participants. And this is how kind of the setup. We had a backup camera, screen capture software to capture all mouse movements, task sheet where the users were kind of following what they were meant to do, thinking aloud. So even though this was for online courses, our participants were on site, completed the set of tasks while thinking aloud, ranked each task difficulty, responded to open-ended questions. We were fortunate to be able to offer fairly compelling incentive for participation. And like I said, audio, video, and screen recorded. And the data analysis, I'm actually going to skip this slide because this is really the key focus for today, which is how do you take this data? We've got audio, we've got screen capture video, we've got quantitative rankings, we've got open-ended comments, we've got facilitator observations, and actually do something with it that's rigorous, systematic, and sort of faithful to the data, but also useful to people. So outputs to date, and I'm just going to go through this just to say that a lot of the stuff we're not covering here has been covered other places. And there's a references sheet that Noah will put on the website after this. And I think it's the first link in chat, but we can repost it, that has clickable links to all of these things. So we had an internal report for Penn State. We had gotten a lot of interest from the broader instructional design community of, hey, cool, how did you do that? We want to learn how to do that. So we have an article in the Journal of Applied Instructional Design, a kind of how-to guide. And then more recently did a webinar for design and development, where we talked about both just-in-time, sort of quick, easy, one designer, one student, how do you use Think-alouds to make some changes, to the more systematic, which is what we were able to do because we had a larger team. So we also have a chapter in the learner and user experience research, and it's sort of an abbreviated version of the how-to guide, but also a very brief sharing of the study design and findings. So you can see more there as well. So wanted to do a deeper dive in methods. And as Tuche and I were sort of talking through what we could do for this that would be new and something we hadn't really covered, what was pretty significant about this project was the amount and diversity of data and how to actually, like I said, systematically and rigorously make sense of that. So that's kind of the main focus. And then the next is sort of once you have these findings, how do you prioritize fixes? How do you know what to attend to? And we're just going to touch briefly on a pilot that we did of a process using sort of heuristics to kind of have some experts evaluate what makes sense to fix first. So with this, I will hand it over to Tuche, and Tuche, I'm going to stop sharing so you can start sharing.
Sounds good. Perfect. Let me just go back to my slide. There you go. Share my screen first. So you can see my screen, but not my notes, right? Perfect. Just to make sure. Awesome. So yeah, thank you so much, Andrea. So yeah, how did we analyze data? I guess that was the main question that we had after we collected, all of those huge data set. So when we started analyzing the data, we noticed a couple of challenges, which we think would be very common challenges for such like university-wide studies where multiple collaborators participated in the data collection process. Some of them were like first, each design unit had slightly different task questions since we wanted to have authentic tasks for each unit. And two, some of the questions themselves were problematic because, but they also like kind of helpful in a way that help us realize there might be some gaps between what the instructional designers and researchers understood from the terms we use versus what our participating students understood from them. Three, since data collection for each unit was facilitated by the instructional designers of that particular unit, there were some slight differences in how they facilitate the sessions. For example, like when to intervene to support the participants when they struggle was slightly different for each facilitator. And the final challenge was the complexity of data, as Andrea shared. We had a variety of data, and thus we need to go, we need to figure out how we could analyze them systematically and rigorously. So our first step was to review all the data that we had for multiple times. These included video recordings of the participants as they completed tasks. You can see the participants' face here as well. They were also captured. If you could capture some emotional differences, we tried to capture as much data as possible. The transcripts of the Think-alouds as the participants were also asked to speak out while doing the tasks. The participants' notes, these were given to the participants after they were done with all the tasks. And for each task, Andrea also mentioned that a little bit, like tasks, like this participant notes after they completed all the tasks. So again, for each task, the participants rated the difficulty level of the task that they completed, and from 1 to 5, and then share their comments about that particular, tasks. We also had the notes from the facilitators who facilitated data collection process. Once we review all of these data multiple times, our second step was preparing the data for analysis. And again, this started with reviewing the data for multiple times again, because we need to get familiarized with data more. And then we coded all tasks for effectiveness, efficiency, satisfaction, and learnability using different metrics from the HCI literature. I'm going to be talking about them very briefly soon. These are all from HCI literature, which included, for example, completion time for each task, steps the participants followed to complete each task. And then finally, we synced up the participants' comments with these metrics as well as facilitators' comments. So before talking about how these look like, let's briefly describe what we meant by effectiveness, efficiency, learnability, and satisfaction, and how we conceptualize them, and kind of categorize the data, right? For example, for effectiveness, this is coming from this particular literature. It was described as the accuracy and completeness with which participants accomplished the tasks. And for qualitative measure, we use for this particular category, we use description of issues participants express while completing tasks. And for quantitative measure, number of tasks completed without assistant or with assistant or failed tasks. And for efficiency, which was described as the amount of effort and time to accomplish a task. And for our qualitative measures, we categorize them as navigation patterns, facilitator and examiner notes, participant comments during Think-alouds, and quantitative measures, relative task completion time by participant, and number of steps followed by the participants to complete the task. Here, we want to highlight the relative because, as you could see here, these are the steps explicated for different participants for only one task. Each participant followed different paths, and those paths didn't necessarily mean that they were doing something wrong or they were failing at completing tasks. They just simply preferred different tasks. That's why we try to identify relatively, whether they completed the task and how many steps they used to complete those tasks. And the third criteria that, as I mentioned, was the satisfaction. There you go. And it was self-rated measures and qualitative comments yielding participants' perceptions and feelings for and reactions to the system and interaction with the system. By the way, these descriptions came from literature. Based on this literature, we try to conceptualize our data within that particular category metrics. And for qualitative data, we use for that particular metrics, we use participant comments during Think-aloud, participants' responses to verbal probing questions, and facilitator examiner notes. And finally, for quantitative measure, we use task difficulty ratings. And the final metrics was the learnability. It was defined as the efficiency gain over time and how easy it is to accomplish simple tasks when the participant use the system for the first time. And again, for the qualitative measures, we use participant comments, participants' responses to verbal probing, and facilitator and examiner notes. And this is basically what the document that we created looked like. We tried to integrate the overview of the document because it was hard because it was a huge document. So you can see that for each task, for each participant, we created efficiency and the metrics as relevant components for each participant, and effectiveness and satisfaction and learnability. And again, as I mentioned earlier, we also synced these metrics and components with the user comments as well as the facilitator comments underneath, and we coded them very kind of roughly under each section. You can see these examples. I mean, I'm happy to talk about them further, but these are just to give you an idea about how we did the process. So basically, this process was done for all tasks, for all participants, and it was like around 19 participants multiplied by 8 individual tasks, and it was like 152 times. So step 3 was coding and aggregation, data coding and data aggregation. So after we were done with creating that document, we coded qualitative data. 2 researchers, Andrea and I, did the coding. And this is, you can see the very kind of rough coding scheme that we created. We also aggregated the data that we had. For example, here you can see the number of participants who completed tasks with or without intervention, and the mean of perceived difficulty level for each task and for each unit were aggregated here. And finally, what we did was we thematized the data based on what we have already aggregated and created, coded. And ultimately, what we find, first, we identify how students were experiencing the UX of online course designs in Canvas. These were reported in one of our publications, and I believe Noah shared the link with you. These are published already, reported one of those publications. So feel free to take a look at them. And the second category that we identified was what UX design principles and best practices do these experiences actually indicated. And these were more like avoid naming ambiguities, minimizing multiple interfaces, designing between the conventions of LMS, grouping related information together, and considering consistent online course design across courses. So after we identified this, we realized it wasn't necessarily enough, because we wanted to also help instructional designers to help them prioritize these fixes, right? We wanted to help them find some form of strategy to help them prioritize these fixes so they can actually integrate those changes within the online course design. So yeah, sorry, that's, I guess, Andrea, you would like to talk a bit more about this?
No, I think you've got it. I actually thought maybe before we transition to this, we could pause and take any questions or comments kind of on what we've talked about up until now.
Sounds perfect.
Maybe we want to stop the sharing just to kind of have a little discussion. So at this point, does anyone have any questions or anything? I realize we kind of went through a couple things fairly quickly, so happy to clarify anything if we sort of made assumptions about terms or kind of what we did. Questions or comments at this point?
I have a quick question for you.
Sure.
Some of the takeaways that I'm getting is consistency, avoiding ambiguity, things along those lines. And I kind of have like a, I guess, personal story. When I was at a prior institution, I was given a course that was completely different than anything I'd ever seen. And when I asked the program coordinator, what's with this course design, he said that he made it completely different from any other course that students go in because he wanted to promote cognitive flexibility, and that there was instructional design theory to back up the notion of making a course completely different than what students expect. I was wondering if there's any relationship to that you see to your work, or if you could talk about that any. I ended up not teaching the course, and I thought it was kind of silly, but
I think so. I'm actually really glad you brought that up, because as we were talking, one of the things I realized was the focus of our study was ultimately very pragmatic. It was conducted in a context. Anyone who does instructional design at a university is probably, a large school like Penn State is probably familiar with this. It really was in response to, no, students would like this better. No, they would like this better. And just, so I want to say that it's kind of like architectural principles, right? So you can break them when you can do them and you know why you're breaking them. And I think that the student often gets neglected in the name of like academic freedom. So yes, there's definitely an argument to be made for not everything being cookie cutter. But it's sort of that, and this gets a little actually not so much to the heuristic thing that we're going to talk about next, but to a degree about the why and sort of the cognitive challenges of doing that. So if it's an advanced design course, and what was the course, Noah?
It was just kind of like for teacher prep, ed tech style class.
Yeah, I mean, so one thing, for example, I taught a course that was it was designing, in like e-learning within learning management systems, and the course had a ton of tools, but it was intentional. It was part of the pedagogy. Mm-hmm. And as the teacher, I did as much as possible to streamline some of that. So it's like I was saying in that slide, comparing UX to LX. Learning is hard and it's confusing and it's kind of sometimes paradigm shifting and it can be frustrating. But does knowing where to submit your assignment need to be one of those things that's hard and frustrating, et cetera? Now, if the course you posited, Noah, was kind of one where they were sort of intentionally designing it where students had to reflect on the complexity of the design, you could make an argument for that. But then I would build it into the pedagogy. I would build in reflection or whatever. I don't know that sort of cognitive flexibility, it needs to be scaffolded and kind of cared for, if that makes sense. So yeah, I could support that argument, but the reality is every single professor and instructional designer could make that argument, and you end up with what we have, which is everybody puts their left menu slightly differently because that's their preference. And students go from one course to another and they're relearning things that have nothing to do with the actual curriculum or learning objectives. So yeah, I mean, I definitely see the argument to that, and I don't think this counters it, but it's kind of like, if you're going to break the rules, you should know them first.
Perfect. Thank you.
Other thoughts or questions? One thing I wanted to ask at the beginning was what kind of role each of you are in and any experience with instructional design courses. So if you wouldn't mind just putting in the chat sort of what brought you, why did you pick this session? And like, what's your experience been with sort of these kind of things, either as a student taking an online course, as a teacher of an online course, as an instructional designer, just to kind of know what people are interested in here.
It's kind of long for chat, but I'm newly graduated master's program. And I'm around 50 years old. So I've seen computers and programs and everything and all of the changes over the years. And user design, a user experience design has always been a big deal to me, because there's got to be an easier way to do this. This is so confusing. It doesn't have to be this way. So that's what got me here. I'm currently working in graduate medical education, and just hoping to be able to apply some of this to my programs.
Awesome. So the question for the thought of the task of the participant, right after the session. So those were written after each time they did the task. They ranked it and then wrote their open-ended comments. And then the way those were analyzed, and we can pull up that slide, but that's one of the slides Tuche pulled up, was those were pulled into that big Excel spreadsheet of kind of this task. These are the way the participant did the task. These were their comments. This was their difficulty ranking. So that was all pulled in there. So just looking at the chats, thank you for typing those also, everybody. Okay, yeah, so it seems like people have definitely ID experiences, which is great. So let me ask you this. When we started this, there was no discussion of UX within the ID community. It was often one instructional designer rolls over to another in their chair and says, hey, I think students are going to click here. And again, just to give Rhonda Reed credit, she said she came from a different, like a website design background, where you wouldn't release a website without testing it with users. And sort of said, why aren't we doing this with students when the interface, the online interface, is their campus? It is their course, it is their class building. So that's what kind of pushed this. And it started as just a very practical thing. And then Tuche and I got involved and kind of made it complex and researchy and all of that, because we wanted to be able to offer practical feedback, but also be able to kind of dig into the theory more and do things in this broader LXD field. So, okay, awesome. Keep putting your questions in the chat. Oh, that's great, Cindy. Yeah, I think that LX is definitely something new and definitely not going to go away, because people are recognizing this more and more. So thanks, everyone. Regina, Kelly, Monica, Cindy, Elizabeth, glad to see people have this kind of applied experience and research interest. So we'll go ahead and go back to kind of the second part, which was piloting this process of how do you prioritize fixes once you've kind of identified some of the challenges. And like Tuche said, so we've got these findings, now what? Okay.
Do you want me to go
yes.
through them, or do you? Okay, perfect. Just to make sure. Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah. So yeah, as Andrea shared, like once we identify the problems and best practices in here again, the next step would be how you actually prioritize what to fix in your course design. So that was the focus of our pilot in the second phase of the study. And for that, we wanted to find a good analytical framework. And we identified Nielsen's heuristics, and that included consistency, match between system and real world recognition rather than recall, flexibility and efficiency of use, and aesthetic and minimalist design and help and documentation. And in addition to that, they also use here, we can see that prioritization matrices. So what it tells here is that, for example, I can just very briefly describe this. If the value to the user increase, but the feasibility of addressing that problem decrease, you can see high gets high, the feasibility just decreases. That means that, oh, sorry, I'm just confused. Sorry. So yeah, value to the user gets increased, but the feasibility of addressing that particular, problem decreases. That means that it can be either maybe or no. That means that either you don't necessarily shouldn't maybe pay much attention to that particular problem in the first stage, or maybe you can have a further conversation with your team or with the users to decide whether you want to actually address that. The best, you can see that the best part, I guess the problems with high value to the users and high feasibility, which means that easy to fix, are the problems that can be addressed immediately. So that kind of the metrics we also use, which I will explain how we use that as well. But first, I wanted to ask you guys a question. Was it clear how I explained that, this feasibility? Because I am going to be contextualizing our process on this matrix. Do you guys have any questions about this matrix? Oh, you already have in the chat, I suppose, right? Okay, you're okay, perfect. I guess not. Okay, I'm moving on. So what we did is that we developed a survey, very preliminary. Here we said that what heuristic was kind of violated, and then we again used the explanation of each heuristic here, and we listed all of our issues related to that particular heuristic, saying that we, based on our user experience data, the system or the design of the course violated this particular, heuristic. And these are just an example issues that, from the user experience data. We didn't include all of them here. For example, for consistency, one of the biggest issues was like inconsistency in the terminology. And like for match between system and real world, one of the main issues was user confusion over group term versus team versus people. So we categorize each of our issues according to these heuristics, claiming that our designs violated this particular heuristics by being this and this. For example, here you can see that lack of hierarchy of importance in to-do list was about flexibility and efficiency of use. After that, we created a Qualtrics survey, and then we asked 4 instructional designers from these units who designed these online courses to rate these issues for each heuristics violated based on 2 criteria. 1, the negative impact on learners. 2, ease of fixing the problem. And these 2 criteria were defined based on these prioritization matrices that I mentioned earlier. And for high, we provided also the explanation. For example, for high, we said potential showstopper, like very time consuming for the student to figure out, or they were never able to figure it out. Takes a lot of learners' time, energy, and could arguably get in the way of their learning. For medium, is a problem more than annoyance, makes the overall design function suboptimally. And for low, an annoyance, not ideal design, not as intuitive as it could be, requires a little extra thought. And for ease of fixing the problem, high was like fixable with a significant amount of effort, coordination, and time. Medium was fixable, but will require longer time commitment. And for low, fixable in a short amount of time. So those 4 participants rated each issues related to each heuristic based on these 2 criteria. And we also included an example page from the Qualtrics survey from an issue here. For example, we explained the heuristic, what heuristic means, and we provided like example problem related to the problem violating that particular heuristic, and ask participants first to rate them based on negative impact on learners and provide their justification or rationale for rating that, and then ease of fixing, and then again rationale for rating that particular or choosing that particular rate. Again, 4 expert instructional designers who designed the sample unit courses participated in this study. Accordingly, once we collected data, we then aggregated the data. For example, this is, by the way, just an example that we included. We are happy to explain the others as well if there's any further interest in that. For example, for issue 1, inconsistency in terminology, there were 2 people just selected medium in terms of negative impact on learners, and you can see one of the comments here, and 2 people selected like low. And in terms of ease of fixing, 3 people said low, while 1 person said high. Accordingly, just looking at the metrics, going back to the here, I can't simply say that this is actually one of the most, I would say, urgent fixes that I would prioritize, because 1, it's a medium kind of impact on learners, so that's important. 2, it's easy to fix, so it should be like kind of prioritized to fix it. So prioritization, just to make it a little bit more systematic, we first take the average severity of impact of learners' experience, and then average easiness of the easiness to fix. And then in order to calculate the priority score, we took the average of these two scores. Again, going back to that metrics. And then based on that, we try to, by the way, you don't necessarily have to follow that. You can totally do it more intuitively. We try to systematize the whole analysis process. That's why we try to take extra kind of step. For low, for example, if the average score is between 1 and 1.39, we just code it as low. By the way, these are not like kind of lows. We just created them to help us make decisions. For high, so high means that these should be prioritized. High, medium also kind of should be prioritized. Lows were kind of, this necessarily shouldn't be prioritized at this moment, but maybe in the future. And for mediums, there should be some kind of discussions between the team members to make decisions regarding the prioritization of that particular issues. And this is just a summary of the prioritization of our issues we identified in user experience study that we conducted previously. So you can see that here the biggest issues with the highest priority, it's a very hard word to pronounce, I'm sorry, consistency. You can see that here, high and high medium, or aesthetic and minimalistic design, or recognition rather than recall. Relatively less priority issue would be help and documentation. You can see that here. So this is just a summary of what to prioritize or what not to prioritize at this moment, just to help our instructional designers to make decisions regarding their immediate versus long-term steps. So yeah, that was basically it. Thank you so much. We're happy to address any questions, or we are happy to discuss any points that you would like to learn more about. Yeah, that's basically it. Thank you. Am I missing anything, Andrea, by the way?
No, that's great. We have one comment from Justin. I'm hoping you would say more about your experience with the flexibility issue in terms of that balance that you're talking about.
Let me just open the slide again. Flexibility in terms of easiness of fix, is that what we are talking about? Just to make sure that
Justin had put a comment in chat about kind of the sticking point in terms of the flexibility. I think it's an efficiency of use with one of the 6 heuristics. So
okay, there you go.
Yeah, just thought maybe Justin, you'd want to share more on that because I think it's an important point. Okay, so maybe we'll revisit that one later.
Oh, okay, there you go.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Oh, thank you so much. That was very explanatory. Let me see. Yeah, I think that's a good point. I mean, no, don't worry about it. Don't worry. I'm just trying to understand the question better so I can address it better. So I think that's a very good point, and I totally understand why some people don't necessarily want to go through step-by-step learnings. But I also feel like for senior roles, maybe they actually have that, they already passed that learning curve in the past, so they don't necessarily need that step-by-step learning. Because what we, again, just, I'm just trying to understand. Let me see, maybe I'm not addressing it very well. Just need to read your first question better, I guess. I don't know, like, Andrea, would you mind helping me out here? Just trying to understand the question and how I can address that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the heuristic for flexibility and efficiency of use is that it works for both the novice learner and the experienced learner. So for those who need step-by-step, it works that way. For those who want shortcuts, it works that way. I don't remember, Tuche, which problems violated that heuristic. I think within Canvas, there are a lot of things that are predetermined. So
in terms of explanation, just to make sure, Justin, are we talking about the help, some form of documentation to support them, or are we talking about the just step-by-step kind of paths that participants or learners can follow to accomplish or complete certain tasks? Oh, sorry. Yeah. No, that's perfect fine. We're just trying to understand your question so we can address it better. That's fantastic. Thank you.
I mean, here's one of the things. So another thing we didn't talk about was that Canvas has, and actually we presented this to Canvas, has certain UX issues that are beyond the control or influence of an instructional designer. So to this point, like, unless you set up a lot of things on, I don't know how many people work in Canvas versus Blackboard, or I'm forgetting what Desire to Learn is now called, Brightspace. Within Canvas, unless you set up really specific things to say if a learner has completed a task, the next time you're in Canvas, you land exactly the same place you landed the first time. The next time you're in Canvas, you land exactly in the same place. So it doesn't remember your progress. So I would say that overall that violates certain heuristics because you're having to redo certain steps to kind of scroll down to that module for that week. So that's another thing when you're doing this kind of usability testing, like we did within a learning management system, you're only really able to look at the stuff within the designer/instructor area of influence. You're already working within a lot of UX decisions that have been made by Canva, by the LMS. One of the discussions that Regina and I were having that kind of prompted one thing that we didn't talk too much about was it's amazing how obvious certain, and Steve Krug, who's sort of one of the usability founders, especially in like just practical terms, you know, has something like, there is nothing more revealing than grabbing a guy off the street, sitting him in a chair and making him use your website while articulating where he's confused. Because we, whether as instructors, instructional designers, or others, have so much accumulated knowledge and perspective in ways of talking about learning, and learners orient differently. So when a learner sits down and wonders, is people the same as contacts? Like, where you've already learned that no, people's where you click to do this, contacts is where you click to do this. Hearing people talk about this, it's so revealing. The other thing that's really fun about Think-alouds is it ends arguments. So you can have two people having like a really heated debate about which makes more sense, but having them watch videos of students struggle, it's kind of like, that's all the proof you need. So I would say what we found were really, really basic things that aren't necessarily put into practice, whether because of habits, politics, beliefs, etc. One of the, like I said, I think I mentioned, we went and presented to each design shop and we showed videos of their own students. And this was all IRB, and we had specific, permission to share videos within certain groups. But I remember distinctly one of the designers watching a video where a student was clicking around and confused. She was like, it's right there. It's so obvious. Click right there. And the point is that what's so obvious to us, when somebody is sitting there trying to navigate your course, they're having a whole different set of thoughts. And that's why Think-aloud, especially when you record it and can show people, is a hugely powerful method. So I think that was kind of one of the fun takeaways of this, was just watching that. And one thing that you'll hear a lot in discussions about design is, well, users are smart, they'll figure this out. These are PhD students, of course they'll know that this is this. And the question always is, but should they have to? Like, should they have to figure it out? Or should, again, where I submit my paper be more obvious? Make me think about the things that matter, not about like how to navigate the learning management system. So I think that's sort of one of the big takeaways as well. So what else? We have about 5 minutes left. Any other thoughts, questions? How does this compare to people's experiences as website users or online course users versus teachers or designers?
I have a question for you. You mentioned the idea about you wouldn't launch a website without having people test it. So should do the same with learners. Oftentimes, being university faculty, you're given a course that was created by who knows who at some point in time. I would, I guess, assume that it's been tested at some point, but maybe not. So maybe you do some testing on it. But how often would you recommend having your online course be reevaluated by learners?
I think that if you do this once and you come up with some basic principles, like we were able to, like, be consistent with naming. If you call it theoretical suppositions paper here, don't call it theoretical suppositions debate paper here. Mm-hmm. Because even though to you they're the same thing, to a learner it's extra thought. But no, your point is great, which is we operate in a very complex system. So we rarely get the opportunity to do this. The only reason we were able to do this was it was a university-wide transition. There was interest in doing it. That's how we got the funding to get students to do it. We were invited to speak a lot. There was political support for us doing it. And designers started listening to us because we were able to show videos of where students were confused. So I think that if you come up with those basic UX principles and are able to stick within those, unless your LMS changes or your, major design changes, I don't know that it needs to happen like every semester or every year or anything. One of the things that I do is for our online Masters of Mechanical Engineering, I conduct the exit interviews. And I always try to sneak in a little UX, even though that's not really what the interviews are about. But, I ask about like, how was it navigating your courses in Canvas? Because these are graduate research professors. They're not going to be told what to do or how to present. And I think this is a testament to Canvas in terms of it's got overall good UX. It's simple. It's fairly clean interface, which was why our first finding was they find it pretty easy to use. That the students would say, yeah, it's fine. You just figure it out. Like, it's not that hard to find where things are. And so after 23 interviews, I stopped asking the Canvas question. But I really wanted to know, from having a background in this, was it a big deal that some professors put things in modules on the Canvas page and others just had a like dump of all their files in a row? And we got a couple saying that, yeah, it's easier when it's organized by week. And so I've incorporated that into my best practices suggestion. But I think that where it's great is, so even if you don't have a learner, like even just if you're, and this is again motivated by Steve Krug, doing any user testing is better than none. So pulling over a friend and saying, where would you find this? If I told you to submit a paper, where would you think you should click? Or like, that is already a huge step from what we normally do. So I don't know, there's probably rules of thumb out there, but if you have some control of it, I think it's great to do it, even just with, a colleague, to say, can you show me how you'd get around this and tell me what you're thinking while you're doing it? That's given you some insight if you are able to make some design decisions.
Yeah, I think in addition to what just, Andrea shared, I would like to just say one thing, and finish probably it. I hope that we didn't really intimidate or overwhelm you with lots of process data in our data analysis. We try to be as systematic and rigorous as possible, but these processes can be done more intuitively and totally. And you guys like have been lots of instructional design and similar experiences. You guys can do it more intuitively. So these steps that we shared shouldn't be, I hope that they will not really intimidate you to try out the user experience kind of studies like Think-aloud strategies in the future. Yeah, these are just for us to be more rigorous and systematic, but yeah, you can totally do it more intuitively. So yeah, that I just wanted to share that. Thank you.
Yeah, and one of the presentations that we linked to in the references list, we did do this sort of systematic, and then we did a just-in-time. And the just-in-time, again, just motivated by Steve Krug, like grabbing a random person off the street, sitting them down and telling them to do something on your website, and then watching their confused face with something that you thought could not be more obvious is better than spending a year trying to find the right user who matches your demographics and then never doing it. So with this project's been a lot of fun because we've been able to do the pragmatic side and actually help designers say, hey, we should do blah, 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 but also really dive into the LXD, HCI, UX kind of literature and be able to do more of the rigorous stuff, which is also a lot of fun. So I think it can kind of be any spot on that continuum.
Excellent.
And yeah, exactly, Elizabeth. It's I attended a UX training once years ago, and I wish I could remember, because they had this brilliant, we all got a pin. Maybe it just said UX, it's not about you. Like, it's about your user. It's not about how you would get around. It's about your user. And that stayed with me, because UX and LXD is really, it's not about you. Like, yes, with teaching and teaching goals and all of that, learning outcomes. But when it comes to how to just get around, it's not what you think they should do. It's what they're trying to do, kind of thing. Well, let me just say one thing quickly, and this goes back to your very original thing, Noah. There are always exceptions to this, right? So we're talking kind of best practices, and best practices by definition are sort of pragmatic, lowest common denominator, but think about the iPhone. Before the iPhone, we didn't know how to do touchscreens. We didn't know how to slide. And now we've learned a new interface. So it was jarring at first. But in order to accomplish what they wanted to, they had to kind of violate previous ways of doing design. So there are always exceptions. And this is more just like the real basics of, don't confuse them when there's no reason to confuse them. So, all right, awesome. Yeah, feel free to get in touch. We both love talking about this. And yeah, any other comments or questions, we're here.
Excellent. I will get this video processed and uploaded to the Design and Development Chronicles here shortly. So if you missed any part of it, we will have an archive available that you can review at your leisure. And thank you so much to our presenters today. It has been a pleasure.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.